The Gwart Show is sponsored by Ellipsis Labs. Ellipsis Labs is building a world where mainstream finance happens on-chain. Their first product, Phoenix, is a fully on-chain limit order book DEX on Solana doing hundreds of millions of dollars in volume. I know this team personally. It's one of the strongest in the space. If you're interested in working with a team that's here to stay, Ellipsis Labs is hiring engineers passionate about DeFi to join their team. You can find Ellipsis Labs on Twitter at ellipsis_labs or head to ellipsislabs.xyz to learn more and apply. Hey guys, today we have on Alex Watts from Fastlane. He's known on Twitter as Thogard, or now Thognad.
Yeah.
Okay.
The monad alignment.
Yeah, okay. So formerly known as Thogard, now known as Thognad. Alex, welcome. What do you, you can just introduce yourself and what do you do at Fastlane?
Hey, so my name is Alex Watts, aka Thogard, aka Thognad. I am the CEO, co-founder of Fastlane Labs. And what we do at Fastlane is it's an MEV company, but like with a twist. We've primarily focused on smart contracts as a way to internalize and a way to allocate MEV. And it's led to some very different use cases and some very different outcomes than what you would find with your traditional like MEV as infrastructure companies.
Okay, what were you doing? You were a searcher for a while, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes.
Can you just like give us a maybe 30 to 45 second intro into crypto and then MEV maybe? Yeah.
So I got into crypto or DeFi in the summer of 2020, along with so many others during the DeFi summer. And I was working in TradFi at the time. I was a vice president at Merrill. And I was just at home because I couldn't go into the office. And I saw an arbitrage opportunity on this token called Titan. I think it was Iron Finance. It was this fractional reserve bank, famously known for rugging Mark Cuban. And I saw this, I was just looking at the chart and I looked at the docs, and you could see just from looking at the chart that there was this arbitrage opportunity that nobody was doing that had to do with the time weighted average price. So I wrote the world's worst Python bot to try to capture the MEV. And every fiber of my TradFi being is saying that no, someone else will capture it. It's impossible to make free money. And I turned on the bot, and then I went to grab a beer with some friends. I came back, I had made 15 grand, and I was absolutely hooked. I was aggressively addicted. And just from then on, I just went so deep into MEV. I went deep into programming and systems programming, smart contract development, and it was just an absolute blast. It set me down a path that I probably never would have gone down otherwise.
Okay, wait. I want to probe a little bit more about that. How long were opportunities like that available? And I mean, maybe are there still opportunities like this available? How? Yeah, I'm kind of curious here. Go ahead.
Dude, it's because I don't know for sure, but I believe you also kind of came from a TradFi-ish or esque maybe background, and it's we're ingrained with this belief where it's if you see free money, don't even bother picking it up unless you've got an FPGA or something like that that's just ready to go. And so I'm sitting here looking at the chart. It was there for about a month. I was looking over a really long time period. And I was all right, either I'm doing the math wrong or this is the most inefficient market imaginable. And it turns out it was extremely inefficient. I think that there's a huge gap between the trader skill set that you see in TradFi and the engineering skill set that you see in crypto. And I think that gap is slowly being bridged. But to answer your question, I mean, for sure, there are huge opportunities. I know of a lot of apps that are just aggressively, desperately looking for searchers. And I think that it is, something where if you want to make, a quick buck, and you're a decent computer programmer and you're decent at finance, as long as you're not trying to build Ethereum's next number one block builder, as long as you're looking to maybe, dig a little bit deeper into some of these projects, absolutely, there's opportunity. It is impossible not to find it if you're just willing to spend a little bit of time.
Okay, so what does Fastlane do now? What is your product and what are you working on?
So right now, what we've been focused on is application-specific sequencing. And application-specific sequencing, aka ASS, has, by the way, Yuki is responsible for that acronym. That is not a Thogard original. Have to do the Yuki acknowledgement every time we discuss ASS for the investors. But at the end of the day, like what we've built is a smart contract framework that allows these applications, these oracles, these wallets, etc., to internalize MEV and to internalize any value that they're leaking in a way that works without any sort of dependencies on other actors in the MEV supply chain. And in fact, that works, let's say, even on Ethereum mainnet in a way that continues to work even if the block builder and the validator is hostile towards the application and wants that MEV for itself. And so it's a very resilient system. It uses smart contracts. And so I'm not going to say that it doesn't have trade-offs. In our case, the trade-off is primarily around gas efficiency. It adds, for the technical people out there, it adds about 100 to 150,000 extra units of gas. But it's a way that really just aggressively internalizes the MEV at the very top of the supply chain without needing apps to update their smart contracts, without needing buy-ins from validators or staking from builders or any of these things. And so it's been great. It's been a blast bringing this to market.
Is this separate from what you did or are still doing for Polygon? You guys built like an entire kind of, what do they call it? Sidecar. Is this correct? For Polygon? No, not sidecar?
I think sidecar is very much like the Ethereum view on Polygon. And, so when it comes to validator side MEV, we're primarily focused on high throughput blockchains. And, what we do on Polygon is not necessarily what we will do on Monad. But on Polygon, believe it or not, the Polygon Foundation was actually very strict about validators not running any sort of custom code, including sidecars. And so we had to do this it was very janky. We had to do this system that had validators literally just peering their nodes with our nodes and would allow value capture there. So the validator node itself wouldn't even know that it was capturing MEV. We were very much like gating and throttling transactions on the way into the validator to make it so that their natural block building algorithm would naturally allow them to capture MEV in combination with our smart contract. And that smart contract is actually what then led us down the application specific sequencing path. When it comes to like Fastlane, one of the terms that we think is really systemic of how we do MEV is this concept of flash execution. Flash execution, if you're familiar with flash loans where you borrow some funds, you do some stuff, and then you pay them back at the end. Flash execution, very similar. The idea being that we will see what someone is bidding in order to have some sort of priority execution. We will then execute that transaction. But if they do not pay their bid by the end of that transaction, then we revert the entire transaction. Now, this is different from how things typically work on Ethereum mainnet or even Solana. On Ethereum mainnet, you typically have a block builder simulating these transactions. With flash execution, we use smart contracts. Searchers, bots, solvers, fillers, swappers, market makers, whatever you want to call them. They will send their transactions to a Fastlane entry point contract, which will optimistically execute their transaction. And then if they don't pay their bid by the end, whole thing reverts. But the reason why this is so nice is we can actually see what their bid is upstream. The validators can see their bid like as they're just looking at the transaction, which means they don't have to simulate anything. They don't have to have any sort of centralized infrastructure dependencies. And in environments with asynchronous execution, it means they can just sort and capture MEV without having to actually run or execute anything at all, which is just very, very optimal for high throughput blockchains.
Okay, can you tell us why ASS has sort of like come to the front and center right now in terms of MEV discussions? Like, can you maybe walk us through like why we have arrived at this point? And I don't know if this is the end game or what, but it does seem like there's a lot of talk about this as of late. Obviously, I've seen this podcast with Nez Lobin and Yuki. Like, this is all over the timeline. What has like led us to this point, would you say?
Honestly, I think just growing awareness of how much MEV validators are extracting and the fact that it doesn't have to be this way. If you look at, like, imagine you're an app right now and you're looking at what sort of environment to build in. Would you want to build in an environment where the entire rest of the stack, where, the builders, the relays, the wallets, where all of them are just aggressively hostile and trying to take money from you? And the answer is no, you probably wouldn't. Unless that rest of that stack has, let's say, I'm just going to make up a thing here, the most liquidity, like Ethereum mainnet. And so there are, huge benefits to building in just these extremely hostile environments like Ethereum mainnet. VCs also really, really like funding apps on Ethereum mainnet, less so the L2s, because Ethereum mainnet is like a proven ecosystem. And so when you look at the rise of something like ASS, application-specific sequencing, you have this like cause and effect. The cause being, people want to actually build on Ethereum mainnet, but they don't want to have to lose all this value. And so the effect is ASS, which is a way to, have your cake and eat it too, which is actually probably not something I should ever say in the context of ASS.
That's right.
Yeah. So when it comes to this, it's really just a way of taking these applications that are on Ethereum or any hostile environment for that matter, which arguably is all of them to a certain degree, and to allow them to internalize value, very similar to how they could do with an app chain, but without sacrificing composability in most cases and without sacrificing user experience. And it's actually, what we found is it's that last one. It's the user experience that is what apps are the most focused on.
Can you tell us what composability means? I mean, I think I have an idea, but can you give your definition of composability? And also, there's a little bit of context, which I told you prior, which is that I heard this podcast with Alex Nesloban, and he's saying that, I guess one of his reservations with regards to ASS is that it does away with composability. What does this mean? So maybe just define your understanding of composability, and then maybe why he would think that, or if you disagree.
Yeah, so composability, I don't think there's one definition. I like to view composability as more of a spectrum, and antagonistic to that composability spectrum would be a value capture spectrum. With composability, you've got different degrees of composable. The most, the highest form of composability would be an application that can be called into and call out to at any time during its action. So let's say you're doing a swap. Someone could do this swap. Some other app could call in and do the swap whenever. And then this app, in the process of doing its swap, could call out to other apps at any time. And so at the very least, there's a sense of the directionality of composability. Can the app be called into by other apps atomically on the fly? And can it also itself call out to other apps atomically on the fly? In a sense, I agree with Alex Nesloban in the very, very specific domain that is anti-LVR mechanisms. At Fastlane, we view it as a spectrum, and the anti-LVR stuff is not the farthest end of the spectrum. And so for Alex's case, if you do buy into the auction off the first transaction in the block model, which I think is a good model, then you would want to gate all of these buys through that auction mechanism. And that auction mechanism typically would be off-chain. And so when you have to gate things through an off-chain mechanism, you do sort of disrupt that composability. Now, the reason why I put things in quotes there is because there's a few things in the works that I think have a strong power to change that. First of all, once you've done the first swap in the block, then that unlocks composability for the rest of the block. And so as long as the builders or the validators or whoever it might be is benefiting from those swaps, which I think should be pretty easy to set up as part of the mechanism, then you can actually just create an environment where you do the first swap, and then everyone else can have full atomic bidirectional composability. But the one thing I would push back on is that that's the only type of ass. I think that I can't take this too seriously when I say it, but there are a lot of different types of application specific sequencers. The ones that we actually have seen the most buy-in and the most interest from apps are actually the fully composable ones, because apps have no desire to disrupt composability. And these are different. When you look at the LVR mechanisms, these are mechanisms that are designed to capture exogenous MEV, which is MEV that is created or instigated or initiated off chain, typically on a Binance, somewhere in Tokyo somewhere. What most apps these days are actually more interested in is the endogenous MEV. And this is MEV that is created by the app. An example would be somebody does a swap. This swap creates a huge price discrepancy, and that price discrepancy itself can be arbitraged back. If you are looking to do application-specific sequencing to capture that, you do not need to disrupt composability in any way. All you really need to do is have the ability to take one swap and bundle it with another swap. Other apps can call in and do their own swaps on chain. They're not going to have any way to get in between your MEV creating and your MEV capturing operations. And so this works for a wide variety of different use cases. We've seen a lot of interest from oracles. Oracle extractable value would fall into this category of indigenous MEV. Just like in general backruns, people doing swaps on dexes, call it a Uniswap v2 fork. A lot of interest there where, hey, these users are doing these swaps. Let's refund them in a way that doesn't require buy-in from any sort of builder or any sort of trusted centralized infrastructure like MEVShare or MEVBlocker. And so at the end of the day, it's where, like, yes, if you're looking at the exogenous MEV, there is the implication of disrupted composability, at least to an extent. But honestly, the endogenous MEV is where we're seeing most of the interest as we're talking to apps about internalizing this value.
You reached out to me and said this was actually sort of the impetus for this conversation. You thought that ASS was not possible on Solana. What makes you say this?
So this is a this is a somewhat technical explanation, but let me see if I can really narrow it in. A big part of how application-specific sequencing works has to do with taking hostile parties or hostile actors and grouping them together in a way that, and sequencing them in a way that might not be in the validator's best interest. A big part of ASS is to say, hey, we're going to capture all of this value, and the validators can't do anything about it. The way that we handle that at Fastlane is by saying that, like, hey, if the validator were to censor the first part of this transaction, which is the value creating thing, then they would also be censoring the second part, which is the value capturing aspect of it. And so a validator who censors the full transaction, simply, they don't capture any value by doing it. All they have is a block with one less transaction in it. And it's typically a fat transaction too. On Solana, there are two nuances to the SVM that we've run into. And if anyone watching this podcast or listening to this podcast can figure out a workaround, please let us know, because we've spent a not small amount of time and a not small amount of resources digging into this, talking to a lot of the best in that ecosystem. First, there are no nonces on Solana. It is so frustrating. On Ethereum, if you have a transaction with nonce 9 and a second one with nonce 10, nonce 9 has to come before nonce 10. You cannot put 10 before 9. On Solana, there are these like block hashes that I believe are in the last 127 or 137 something blocks. And those are how you show that the transaction was somewhat recent. But there is no ability that anyone has, either the user or the application, to sequence any of these transactions inside of a block. There is a concept called durable nonces, which is part of the Solana OS. But those also do not work for intra-block sorting or sequencing. They just would lead to a whole bunch of reverts, which would lead to the validator capturing that value. The second reason why you can't do application-specific sequencing on Solana, and this is actually the one that is more frustrating, is that there are no partial reverts on Solana. On Ethereum, and just in the EVM in general, The way Fastlane Atlas, our application-specific sequencer, works is it'll take different solutions from different solvers or searchers or whatever, and it'll put them together into the same transaction, such that if one of them fails to do what they said they were going to do, it's flash execution. So we just unflash, their portion, and we just move on to the next highest bidder, etc. And this allows us to have robust confidence in the execution outcome, regardless of the ability to accurately simulate any of these, operations or transactions from these searchers. Which again, when you assume that the validator or the block builder is hostile, you cannot assume reliable simulations. But on Solana, we can't do that. On Solana, if you take the operations, these like signed messages from multiple adversarial searchers, and one of them starts executing before the rest, and that one decides, hey, actually, I can't do what I said I was going to do, I'm going to revert. Not only could they revert in such a way that causes the entire transaction to cancel such that the remaining searchers or solvers are censored, it's that's actually their only option. They can't undo it any other way. There's no undo button on Solana in the middle of a transaction, which is just very, very frustrating from a building standpoint. If I'm going to steel man why it is that way, it's because that's actually a huge part of the throughput. If you do allow for this like undo, if you do allow for these partial reversions, how do you do that? Well, each time you make a call out, you have to copy the state. And if you do a partial reversion, you have to revert back to that copy of what the state was prior to that transaction. That adds a lot of overhead. That adds a lot of, pressure onto the stack. And so, yeah, Solana, very opinionated on high throughput, but there is no way, because of these two, features, so-called, there is no way to sequence adversarial actors inside of a block without the validator themselves being the ones to do it.
Okay, so do you think this is a big impediment? Is this your point in saying all this?
Yes, it is a colossal impediment. It is a massive blocker. It disrupts composability. It disrupts competition. Fundamentally, it's just something that means that applications who do want to internalize value, maybe Solana is not the best place to do it.
Thanks for listening to The Gwart Show on the Blockspace Podcast Network. Subscribe to our newsletter at blockspace.media to get the show directly to your inbox. Show links, transcripts, and Bitcoin articles twice per week. Stay ahead of the conversation by visiting blockspace.media.
I saw this tweet you had the other day. You said, I don't think the PBS experiment will last much longer. You had a lot of MEV people respond to you. What is the rationale behind this?
Yeah, so PBS is a very well-intentioned mechanism. The idea being to create this sort of fair exchange between builders and validators, where validators are signing off on these blocks blind. This means the validators can't see the transactions inside of the blocks. The rationale for why this is because if validators could see the transactions inside of the blocks, they might unbundle the transactions. They might, do things with them, or they might just take those blocks and mine it themselves and not give the builder anything at all. So this is, there are reasons why PBS exists. But one of the downsides of PBS is that it creates private order flow. Because the validators cannot see the transactions inside of the blocks, you have this system where builders can go out. I mean, you guys have covered private order flow before, but builders can effectively go out and, market like, hey, if you send your transactions to us, the builder, we will give you a refund of any sort of MEV that's created. That's what MEVBlocker and MEVShare are. And more recently, we've even seen the rise and proliferation of gas rebates, where, hey, if you pay any priority fees above the base price, then we'll give you a portion of that rebated as well. And so you look at these systems, and over time, I think right now we're at 44% of all transactions being private. A year ago, it was 15%. A year before that, it was, I think, 0, because PBS had just started. But it's this clear system where more and more of this value over time is being siphoned off from the validators and it's not even going to the builders either. A lot of it is being passed through the builders back to the wallets like MetaMask or to users of RPC services like MevShare and MevBlocker. And so it seems pretty clear to me. Like, I don't think you have to be like a MEV expert to just look at a graph of the percentage of transactions that are private and see that that's an increasing number, right? That's increasing over time. And when even the priority fees are, in part getting kicked back to users, like, that's not good for validators. That's money that, a year ago or 2 years ago would have been going to validators. And the only reason why this is possible, why all of these, rebates, which, and again, like, I'm not trying to say that rebates are bad. They're not. Rebates are good, but they're not good for validators because this is money that validators would have been earning in a vacuum. And what's fascinating to me is that this is a result of PBS that allows private order flow and that validators are opting into. Validators, they don't have to do this. Now, if one validator or, 2 or 5 were to say, hey, we're going to quit PBS, private order flow would still exist, and those validators would just not see any of it. And those validators would, at the end of the day, just make less than their peers. But if a significant threshold of validators were to say, you know what, actually, we do want priority fees, then in that environment, these validators would, assuming they have that threshold, be able to be a large enough stake such that private order flow could no longer exist. Users would no longer be willing to wait, 1 or 2 minutes until a validator who does accept private order flow mines a block. And all of a sudden, all of this private order flow has to become public. It has to be, put up for auction so that different searchers can auction the right to backrun it. And these auctions, the beneficiaries of these auctions would be the validators. They would be, capturing that MEV. They would be capturing those priority fees. And so I think that, like, from my point of view, again, it's like you look at the graph of private transactions over time, and it seems pretty clear to me that eventually we'll hit a threshold where the validators are going to realize that they're opting into a system that kind of cucks them. And, and again, whether or not they should be cucked, I'm not saying that necessarily is a bad thing, but validators are opting into it right now. And I'm not sure that that is sustainable.
Okay. So then what comes about? You say that it's a failed experiment. Where do we go from here?
Well, honestly, I don't think that the, fix or the change is like that big. A big part of why PBS is the way that it is it's, proposer builder separation, but there's this commit, delay, reveal mechanism nested inside. The delay alone, let's get rid of that. But like, if you assume that the validators are, maybe not all of them are going to just unbundle everything all the time. I don't think Lido or Coinbase or Binance are aggressively going to be doing the same thing that, our hero, the Low Carb Crusader, did. I think on one hand, it's something where it's not that hard to just say, hey, let's get rid of the commit reveal aspect. This speeds up the blockchain because we're taking out that, I think it's a 1 second delay right now, but it speeds up the blockchain. You remove that, but everything else could literally just stay the same. You could still have the builders. And it's like, maybe the builders, maybe every once in a while, some random validator will steal a little bit of value from the builders. The builders are going to keep going. They're not just going to be like, you know what, I give up. I'm not going to make any more money at all. Like, that's not going to happen. They're not going to just walk away. They might get screwed a little bit. Sandwiching is going to become extremely rare, which is a good thing, I think. Because as we've seen with Low Carb Crusader and, also as we've seen with Fastlane on Polygon, when you aggressively unbundle things, sandwiching is, too risky. But that helps out on the apps. Apps are going to like Ethereum more. Apps are going to be more likely to participate in the ecosystem. And so, I don't think the change is really that big. Flashbots would still be flashbots. Builders would still be builders. Validators would still be validators. I'm not trying to come in and say that, Ethereum should use Fastlane. Fastlane is not meant for Ethereum. Fastlane is for high throughput EVM environments where simulations are unreliable. That's not Ethereum. I just think that, Flashbots should get rid of the commit reveal mechanism so the validators can earn more. And I think that if they don't, someone will. And, I view it as inevitable.
What do you think of multiple concurrent proposers?
I love it. I'm very bullish on multiple concurrent proposers. You'd mentioned before, as we were talking about application-specific sequencing, we had gone into how there was this off-chain gate to control, who gets the first transaction in a block. One of the reasons why that gate has to be off-chain is because if you put it on-chain, then a proposer could just sequence it, or could censor it rather. They could not sequence it. They could unsequence it. And so when you have multiple concurrent proposers, all of a sudden you have this ability to take all of this, complex infrastructure that right now is typically off-chain, typically almost always centralized. And huge shout out to the Sorella team, by the way, for actually making a decentralized version of this. As far as I know, they're the only ones. But you have all of this like off-chain infrastructure that's like slower, unwieldy, not atomically composable. And when you have multiple concurrent proposers, you actually don't have to worry as much about any of these proposers censoring anything. All of a sudden, now you can start running a lot of these auctions on chain. And Fastlane has actually proven this out, although we don't have multiple concurrent proposers. On Polygon, we were actually able to build, using our application-specific sequencer, we were able to build a RFQ, which is boring, I know, but it is fully on-chain, it is fully decentralized, and it is fully permissionless. Now, when you compare that to the RFQs on Ethereum, all of which are permissioned, all of which are, off-chain with centralized trusted infrastructure, and all of which are just, slower. The Fastlane RFQ, which, by the way, is powered by the Polygon mempool. Polygon blocks are priority sorted. The way the RFQ works is that searchers watch the mempool. They see a user's transaction to buy through the RFQ, and then the searchers will literally front running for justice. They will front run the user's transaction with a solution. I'm not going to sit here and say it's gas efficient. I'm not going to sit here and say that people should run this on Ethereum mainnet. It would probably not be ideal for Ethereum mainnet, but just the fact that something like this is possible in an environment where, we have high conviction that censorship is extremely unlikely is an example of the kind of application that you could actually build even more trustlessly over on any blockchain that has multiple concurrent proposers. MCP takes the trust assumptions of a single proposer is like a 1 out of 1 censorship threshold, right? If the one proposer wants to censor you, then you're censored, which is why so many of these RFQs have to have permissioned and whitelisted participants, because you don't want the proposer to censor the fulfillments or the fillings of all of their competitors. That's why there's KYC if you're trying to do Uniswap X and all this stuff. There's just these strange interactions that happen when the proposer is also maybe the block builder, who is also maybe the swap filler. But when you have multiple concurrent proposers, all of that extra leverage just vanishes. Same with priority sorting and priority sequencing, where you sequence transactions by their priority gas fee. You gain much more confidence and conviction that if you do something with this fee, then it will, by definition, happen before these other transactions. Like in our case, we know that the searchers who are front running the user will always execute before the user's transaction. So we're not as worried about a censoring builder taking those searchers' fills and putting them after the users. This is why our RFQ is actually faster than all of the ones on Ethereum mainnet, including the ones that say that they are ultra fast. They have off-chain infra that has to be hit. Ours literally doesn't.
How much of a difference does something like MCP make for Ethereum, in your opinion, in terms of bringing activity back to the L1? I think a lot of, at least some of the reservations I've seen with increased block times, multiple concurrent proposers, just a lot of these kind of, recent proposals, I think a lot of the pushback I've seen has been how much of a difference does this make, right? Is this going to bring activity back to the L1? What's your just maybe personal opinion on that?
Honestly, I think it might be too late. That might be a horribly bearish thing for me to say. I am very bullish MCP. I hope every network uses MCP. But I think, honestly, Ethereum's biggest problem with why it's losing a lot of these more modern apps is the cost. It's the gas price. It's the fact that like if you are building an app and you're doing like a very simple Uniswap V2 and your users are all institutional, then like, yeah, sure, Ethereum mainnet all the way. Why not? But if you are building...
hang on 1 second. Is there actually evidence of that? Like insofar as, is there evidence that institutions will just pay substantially more if they also have the opportunity to use another chain where they don't have to pay substantially more? Like the reason I ask is because I think a lot of the Ethereum value, I mean, I'm kind of zooming out now just to a more broad topic, but like a lot of the Ethereum value proposition is, well, it's, credibly neutral and decentralized. It's the most credibly neutral, most decentralized settlement layer. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, does Goldman actually care about that if they are mainly trading real world assets on a blockchain? Like, is that a huge value proposition to them that some... Go ahead. I see you kind of like starting to...
No. I mean, I honestly don't know.
That's what I think saying.
That, yeah,
that's like,
dude,
it's interesting too, because it does seem like a lot of the value proposition, a lot of the value accrual hinges upon some of these kind of like, maybe, right? Like maybe BlackRock's going to pay $300 to settle every 5 minutes in the future, but like maybe not. I don't know. This is oftentimes where I'm kind of like, yeah. Settlement layer, like it doesn't seem like right now, for example, I mean, you hear Anatoly bring this point up a lot. Institutions are not paying hundreds of millions of dollars to settle, right? Like a lot of time, I mean, I don't... Okay, go ahead.
I'll push back on that. I think that the DTCC's revenue is in the hundreds of millions each year. I think so.
Okay.
Either the DTCC or the OTCC. But yeah, I think, but again, like all the member exchanges each have to put in their own capital. So a lot of that's like going back to the exchanges anyway. So it's a bad metaphor.
Okay. So anyways, go ahead. What were we talking about before? I cut you off and I went on a tirade.
No. That's good. So like, let's dial deeper into that. So I think that there's a big difference here, right? Between are these institutions, do they, actually think this because they've analyzed the tech versus are they willing to do this because there's a narrative that is out there that they buy into? And I feel like it might be the latter. I feel like they might think that they're, doing it for the right reason. How valid that narrative is, though, I do not know.
Well, I mean, I don't even know what... I guess we're talking in like vague sort of...
Well, economic security. So, for instance, let's take economic security. I think totally from Solana. I was dunking on Solana earlier, so let me prop Solana up a little bit so I can make sure I can antagonize both sides equally. Totally has this great comment around economic security being a meme, and I'm inclined to agree with him, right? Like if you were to look at, how much it takes to get like the Ethereum validators or the Solana validators or, the Monad validators or the Cardano validators or any of them to equivocate or to, do something that is against the best interest of the chain, it's not really like the actual amount that you have like staked through those validators, right? These validators are run by people. These validators are run by people, many of whom are underpaid, but like it's just DevOps, right? And so, maybe there's only a handful of people. Maybe, actually, I know for a fact that a lot of these, larger validators have pretty robust, safety measures in place to prevent any like single actor. So maybe you have to bribe 2 of them or 3 of them, but it's like it's not going to cost you, $300 million. Or even like $1 billion to, bribe the people running, the Binance or the Coinbase validator. These are people. And so I think that a lot of the Ethereum economic security is based on like, oh, it's economic security, oh, it's cryptographic, it's like, okay, but you can just kidnap these people, So yeah, I think the whole thing, I kind of view it with like a grain of salt.
How do you view Ethereum's long-term sustainability in terms of high fees on the L1? Like, do you think this is correct in this kind of assumption that there will just in perpetuity be high fees on the L1? And I guess mainly user interaction will occur on other layers, right? Like this settlement layer thing.
I think, like, just off the bat, I think that the high fees on Ethereum L1 has already been disastrous for Ethereum because they've already lost all of the more complex like app developers. It's not just that like apps are sensitive to users paying more. It's that if you want to build an app that actually does something more complex than just like an X times Y equals K swap, you're probably going to have to do it in an environment where, the gas cost is like exponentially less. Because if you're building a complex app, that extra gas cost is going to exponentially increase as users have to, use more of your code and, execute more of your program. And so when you look at things like central limit order books, you've got Phoenix on Solana, you've got, Kuru on Monad. No one's building a central limit order book on Ethereum. And this is arguably like the most efficient type of exchange that there is, but like no one's doing it on Ethereum. Then you look at the L2 roadmap, and I think that like cool, but the L2s are all centralized. I think Unichain is actually the first L2 we've seen so far that has a clear-cut path towards decentralization. Unichain actually, as an aside, strikes me, I hate to say this, it strikes me as a little bit more of like a Validium than an L2 with the staking happening on Ethereum mainnet. But, at the end of the day, I think that, yeah, it's like, we've got these L2s, but then you've got this like 7-day to finality. And if you have 7 days to finality, that's not composable. That's just a huge disruption in, your day-to-day business. You can't wait 7 days to be, sure. And I think that honestly, if we're looking at what institutions care about, the high velocity of crypto funds through DeFi, that is what institutions care about. That is actually the first thing that I cared about before I even started like messing around with crypto, was looking at just the insane velocity on stablecoins relative to cash. And it's like, you can have insane velocity, but like insane velocity without, instant finality. When you have these like, 7-day, until finality rollups, that's not something that Goldman Sachs is going to get excited about.
So what does the L1 look like in 5 years?
Honestly, so I hate to show my own bags, but honestly, Monad is EVM, so it's a great place for apps to build. It's got great application specific sequencing. It's going to have a great liquid staking token, and it's going to have just like amazing validators. But it's also got single slot finality. Single slot finality is huge.
But Alex, this doesn't exist yet, though. What does it?
Sure.
What is? No. I mean, I'm not trying to. I just want to be clear about. I want to be clear about. Monad is an idea currently, and what I want to know is what does the Ethereum L1 look like in 5 years? Do you, like, and maybe your response was, well, they've copy pasted all of Monad, but if not, what does the Ethereum L1 look like in 5 years?
I think, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't copy and paste all of it. I think that it's like we've already seen, right? Because, Celestia came up with a lot of the, 4844 stuff. Like Ethereum does do a good job of, taking some of the best ideas from other ecosystems and porting them in. One of the things that Monad will not have, unfortunately, is multiple concurrent proposers. It would be great if it did, but Monad is also ultra big on throughput and MCP in the Ethereum sense. And we can get into the differences between Solana MCP and Ethereum MCP. They're totally different. But MCP in the Ethereum sense would probably most likely hinder throughput. And Monad doesn't want that, for good reason. But I think that like at the end of the day, Ethereum, if they go into MCP and they lean on that for the censorship resistance, then it could become very much a bulletin board in a sense. And I think that that's something that does have value, especially if this bulletin board can atomically, execute, program on top of that data. Will it ever switch to MCP, in my lifetime? Maybe my grandkids can enjoy this, utopia of Ethereum doing MCP. And I think the speed of the Ethereum Foundation iterating on these concepts is honestly, like you said, 5 years. If I'm being real, I don't think it'll look that much different in 5 years from how it looks right now. I hate to be the one to say it, but it's a lot of baggage, a lot of friction that's built up.
I think you have thoughts on ETH is money. Let's hear them.
I'm not convinced that ETH is money. I like to view ETH as a natural resource. And when it comes down to it, right, like ETH is gas. If you are using the network, then you are using ETH. You are, paying it to use the network, just like you're, paying to fill up your car with gas every day, and you use this, a portion of it gets burned, etc. But it is just so funny to me. It's just so deeply ironic that, you have a large, very vocal part of the Ethereum community talking about just burning ETH. And if you buy into ETH being a natural resource that allows you access to this public, permissionless, trustless, decentralized bulletin board / computer, if you buy into ETH as a way that anyone can, drive their car to work on, the internet superhighway, then maybe don't fucking burn it. At the end of the day, right now, if the US government were to light all of its, oil reserves on fire, you and I would both become richer people because the value of the gas in our car and the tank of our car would increase, right? Because all of a sudden, all this other gas is burned. But we're going to feel that bad. We're going to feel that bad the next time we go to the pump to refill because we are using this ETH for a purpose. We're not investing in it. We're not buying it to have it appreciate in value. We're buying it because we have to use it. It's a natural resource. And so I think that fundamentally you have this, juxtaposition where you have these two sides that are just at odds with each other. On one hand, you've got the, ETH as an investment, which are people that really want the value to increase, investors, people that buy it to hold it, ETFs, et cetera. Then on the other hand, you've got the people that are actually using the network. If you're actually using the network, you want the value of ETH to go down because you want to be able to buy it and then use it. You want it to be it's literally gas. We even call it gas, right? And just burning gas is just never, that never sat well with me. Finding ways to get that gas back to the people that were using it, maybe subsidizing the, actual users of the network, rather than just burning it for the sake of the investors. I think things like that are very fascinating. And earlier, I was talking about some of the downsides of PBS. I think that, that actually might be one of the upsides is that there are ways, through PBS to actually do that. But at the end of the day, I don't think of it as just a natural resource or just an investment or even just as money. I think that there are vested parties that have interests in it being each of those things. But I think that those things are fundamentally at odds with each other. And it has been very fascinating for me kind of sitting on the sidelines, watching a lot of this narrative unfold to see, they're all valid points, right? If ETH does get too expensive, that is a liveness issue for the chain. Totally said that. But before that, Vitalik said that. That's literally a Vitalik quote. And, he's not wrong there. But at the same time, if you do buy into the ETH as security or as economic security,
you need a high value.
You need a high value. Yeah. And so do I have a solution that can help reconcile those two opposed viewpoints? No, I don't. I wish I did. I actually fundamentally think they're unreconcilable. I would love to be proven wrong about that. I would love to be proven wrong, but
yeah, I don't disagree. I think the closer you converge on ETH at its utility value, the worse it looks as an investment. So I I understand the rationale. I was actually talking to Mike Neuter. Like I just had a podcast with him, and I basically said to him, I think like in order to preserve long-term like value, I don't know that ultrasound money is like a bad idea. It may actually be the best chance. It just requires a lot of things to kind of like fall in place. And one of those things falling in place is a lot of the activity has to stay on the L1, and a lot of ETH has to get burnt on the L1. And then now moving all this execution, and like you can have a very low velocity of ETH on the L1 and an extremely high velocity of ETH on all these L2s, and it's not really being represented on the L1. So you're not really seeing this like store of value aspect. You said to me prior that you felt that L2s were probably parasitic in some capacity. I mean, do you want to expound upon that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have too many, groundbreaking.
Yeah.
I think like, Kyle and just like the broader ecosystems are doing a pretty good job of covering that. But, I do think that there's an argument to be made that, if these L2s are denominating, their, gas token in ETH, and you are, boosting the, velocity, which is, an impact on the supply. But more realistically, I don't like to think of it. I unfortunately, I hate to think of it, but I think it's accurate to think of L2s as being parasitic on like the talent and on the narrative of Ethereum. And I think that when you look at how a lot of the apps that should have been building on Ethereum are now building on the L2s and are now aligned with the L2s, which are fundamentally different than, the Ethereum Foundation, there is very much a brain drain going on from ETH mainnet to the L2s, also to, other L1s, and also to, other ecosystems in general. But I think that as we're seeing more and more of this, intellectual capital moving to the L2s, it's not clear to me that that'll ever come back to Ethereum.
Interested in Bitcoin scaling, startups, or learning more about Bitcoin softworks? Join us Saturday, November 9th at the Fidelity Center in Boston, Massachusetts for Op Next, a one-day conference on scaling Bitcoin hosted by Blockspace Media, the producers of this podcast. Join Bitcoiners like Peter Todd, Portland Hodl, and more to discuss various Bitcoin proposals like OpCat, the Great Script Restoration, CTV, and more. Attend workshops, speaker sessions, and panels discussing the latest in scaling tech, from ZK to ARK to Bitcoin softwork history. And for a limited time, use code OCTOBER to get 25% off a general admission ticket. Find out more by visiting opnext.dev. Again, that's October at opnext.dev. You can find out more by checking out the show notes below.
Why do you think it's? I mean, I think we both probably have our theories as to why, but even like, for example, Kyle obviously incenses a lot of the Ethereum people, and I can understand why, right? Like he's been a long-term Solana bull. He was bullish on EOS prior to that. Like he's BC, right? And so like I can understand the reservations, but you were somebody who started on building on Ethereum, then eventually moved elsewhere, but you seem to have like a pretty good, well, I guess you're still sort of building in some capacity on Ethereum L2s at least. But why do you think that the message is coming from the wrong people? I mean, it seems like you realize this stuff. I tend to agree with you. It doesn't mean that I'm right. Okay. But I tend to agree with most of your points, like, especially regarding like utility value versus, store value and like how that like plays a drastic role on like what you can build and what Ethereum is trying to do. But why do you think the message has been sort of difficult to relay? Like, is it the wrong people sharing it? It doesn't seem like the EF is really willing to acquiesce on any of these like strong, hard, views or whatever.
I think fundamentally, I think that there's just like a wall between professor land and the real world. Yeah, and I think that when you look at Ethereum or just blockchains in general, from the perspective of like a whiteboard or just a LaTeX formula, then I think the decisions and the criteria start to look very different, and the results start to look very different. You and I both know that Coinbase is never going to run a sandwich bot. that would be like, honestly, I hope they would. That would be so funny, but they're never going to do it, but when you look at a lot of the justifications for like PBS, it's like, hey, we don't want any of these validators to, unbundle and, do these things. And it's like, well, I mean, they're really, if you look at who the actual players are, they're probably not. But I bring that up as an example of just this like divorce between Professor Land and, reality. And I think that economic security is another one of those scenarios where Professor Land, which is where Ethereum has, billions, if not trillions of dollars of economic security, and reality, which is where, hey, let's just kidnap a few DevOps people. I think that's another place where there's a big divorce. And I think that the Ethereum Foundation, by the way, please do not kidnap any DevOps people. I'm just going to throw that out there. I'm going to feel really bad if any of my friends. Yeah, it's just please don't. But no. So I feel like economic security in particular is one of those just professor style narratives that's like really, really trumpeted from the Ethereum Foundation, because from an academic point of view, it makes a lot of sense, and it can really add a lot of value, and it is something that Ethereum uniquely has. It's Ethereum has more of this so-called economic security than any chain other than Bitcoin, and Ethereum has the programmability aspect to it. So like it makes a lot of sense from Professor Land. I think that like once you zoom in on what's actually happening with the players, in their own little microstructures, such as we're going to, take this and make our own app chain out of it. And, there's no longer Uniswap on Ethereum. And so we lost, 25% or whatever of the volume of the, gas. And so it's like, it makes sense. I think it's not in tune with reality, but it is like, on the whiteboard, yeah, I get where they're coming from.
Do you think that blockchain should be valued off the MEV they extract?
No, I do not.
Nope.
I have no idea what blockchain should be valued off of. I can poke holes in every argument that I've seen.
MEV, right, but if you don't say MEV, well, also, I mean, priority fees are a form of MEV, I would say. Like, would you agree with this?
I would disagree with that.
Okay. Well,
I mean, priority fees are priority fees. Like it's just gas. I mean, I think that if you start saying everything is MEV, then the entire subject becomes very relativist really quickly, and you just lose a lot of the distinction of meaning. What I would say though is like I do think when it comes to an L1 validators, if they're competing over seeing like, hey, how much value can I extract? Long term, that's not healthy for whatever ecosystem they're part of, right? And so I think that like long term, we wouldn't necessarily want to value a blockchain off of the MEV, because those blockchains would be the ones that are going to be the most likely to lose apps to other blockchains that are less extractive. And we even saw on Solana, Jito Labs turned off their mempool because it was leading to too much sandwiches. Now, did Jito turning off the mempool mean that Solana's network value dropped by like 80%? No. If anything, Solana was worth even more after Jito turned off the mempool, because it made apps even more comfortable building on Solana. So if I'm being like, if I had to pick one way to value an L1 blockchain right now, it would be, what are apps willing to pay to be on that blockchain? The apps, it's become crystal clear at this point. The apps are bringing the users, right? And so at the end of the day, it's like, what are the apps willing to pay to be on that blockchain? And I think that there are really two things that the apps care about the most. The first would be composability with other apps. Like apps really like being composable with other apps. If you're running a lending protocol, then you really want there to be a DEX of some kind.
Yeah, but okay, so this is why I was asking you before what your definition of composability is. There's like 10 definitions in crypto of composability. This is different than what you were talking to in terms of being able to like tap into a contract atomically or something versus being on the same. Oh, okay, well, I just think of I thought of your first definition of composability more like in a block construction way. And this is more like being on the same layer as a number of other DeFi applications that, provide like, symbiotic effects or whatever. But anyhow, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no. So, but you bring up a good point. So this is actually a great example of atomic, like mid in-flight composability, where when you're doing a liquidation as a liquidator, in the middle of your liquidation, you typically need to be able to swap on a DEX in order to unload the inventory that you're liquidating, and so that you don't have any sort of like delta or like carry risk.
Exactly. Yeah.
And to your point, like LVR, these LVR gate mechanisms, you cannot do this with like off-chain, like LVR gated mechanism, but you can do it with something like Uniswap V2. And so I think like, if you do view composability as a spectrum, being able to just be atomically called into by another app would be the most composable part.
Okay.
Like a 10 out of 10 on the composability spectrum, which is what liquidators need in order to liquidate safely without having to, carry inventory themselves, which they hate doing, because why would you want to carry inventory in something that's getting liquidated? But anyway, so like composability is very, very important. And you typically want that inside of the same L1 blockchain. Like we can talk about how, there are these composability solutions like chain abstraction. None of them have bidirectional atomic composability, and none of them are remotely close to being able to do that. Anyone that says otherwise is full of shit, and will be for some time. Anyone who says they can do that, I can very cleanly exploit their app. But the other thing that apps really care about too is UX. Like, it's not just a matter of composability with the app layer. It's also about the user experience. And the UX is something that validators actually have a monopoly on. I think things like pre-confirmations, things like automating transactions, these are things that apps would be willing to pay a lot for. And a great example of this is actually Base. Base, through the wallet, through like the Coinbase wallet, Base actually lets their users use their Coinbase balances on Base. That's like a unique UX advantage that is uniquely given by virtue of this, centralized as fuck sequencer. It seems to me that in the future, we're going to start seeing L1s compete over UX benefits, because UX benefits are things that apps are willing to pay for. All of the apps are like, how do we onboard the next billion users? Well, it's because you don't want those billion users to even know that they're onboarding to crypto, right? Like, this is not, anything, revolutionary I'm saying here. But the way to that is through UX. And right now, apps are very opinionated on that. And the validators on these chains that they can deploy to can have a massive impact. Like, one of the things that we're most excited about on Monad is because of its single slot finality, like, you can actually have the validators provide some very strong, very fast, like, pre-confirmations. And you can have the validators handle things like automation, have them handle, things like gasless transactions on behalf of the app, so that a lot of this stuff is abstracted away. And that makes it just really, really clean for apps to build in an environment with just amazing UX. And so it's like, for let's say my grandmother, is she going to want to use an app that takes like 12 seconds or longer before she gets like finality? And that's after she figures out how much to pay in like the MetaMask Gas Explorer. Or is she going to want like a one click, and then, like 400 milliseconds later, she gets the, confirmation that it went through? Like,
what is your grandmother doing on a blockchain?
I come from a very degenerate family, so.
Okay. All right. Good answer.
But it's like realistically though, I think that validators do have a monopoly, for better or for worse, on certain UX improving features. And I think that these UX improving features are things that apps would move chains just to get, so that they can offer that to their users. And so if I were to try to value, a blockchain, I would probably do it off of how much the apps are willing to pay for the UX improvements. And I think Kyle might respond that is MEV. And I don't know that I would be able to disagree with that. But yeah, I mean, pre-confirmations, maybe they're MEV, maybe not. I don't really know. But honestly, it's about apps and UX. That's the future. You
said to me that validators will have to do more than mine blocks. Is this what you're referring to? Absolutely.
Yeah. It's what we're seeing in the MEV supply chain is a lot of these entities are just shifting and moving to doing roles or to capturing revenue that was previously captured by another entity. MEV, for instance, it used to be captured by validators, and some chains it still is, but now apps are capturing a lot of it. Validators, what we're seeing is, especially through this pre-confirmation stuff and through like automation, validators are going to start acting a lot more like, I don't want to call them wallets, but more like bundlers. Think your Alchemy, your Biconomy, like those entities. And it's because they have a monopoly on being able to do that safely. If Alchemy or Biconomy were to try to bundle, these operations into a transaction, and then the validator were to just be like, yeah, actually, no, I'm going to take that for myself, the validator totally could. And so we're seeing this kind of like shift in the supply chain. And I think that, validators are going to have to start capturing the value that they can. And it's not a small amount either, right? Like Alchemy is worth a fuck ton, like these are like high revenue, tasks that need to get done to better the blockchain and to better the user experience. It's just a different type of thing than what validators were doing before.
It seems like what you're referring to, though, is prone to very quick vertical integration and probably centralization of validator sets, right?
Could be.
Yeah. It seems like I don't know, there's a future where Citadel and XTX and SIG are the three validators, and they're just direct order flow from wallet to validators. Like, is this a future? I mean, especially what do you think of this? Like, is this the direction it looks like it's the direction we're headed, but would you agree?
I think that if nobody does anything about it, that is absolutely the direction we're heading. I don't know that I'm ready to throw my hat in the ring yet. I think that this is a fight that we still have a chance to win. But I definitely think that if no one does anything else, then
what do you mean when you say does anything else? Like, what is the alternative?
Well, I think like fundamentally, the L1s can be opinionated. One L1 in particular that I think like in technical circles, people really like dunking on this L1. I personally love it. I think it's a fascinating experiment, and I think it'll actually pan out really well. Berachain. Berachain's proof of liquidity is one of the most elaborate and just fascinating examples of what is, in essence, a social experiment, right? The way proof of liquidity works, I'm going to dumb it down a lot. People that are familiar with Berachain are going to know that I'm explaining it incorrectly. I'm cutting out most of it, just focusing on one particular point, which is that staking rewards are fundamentally controlled by governance vote. And that means that if you were to have a, Citadel, type come in and just take over everything, then their social layer could just be like, fuck off, and reallocate the staking rewards to whoever they want to. Now, there are controls over this. There are like very strict controls over this, but you're fundamentally like with Berachain, you have this environment where the ecosystem, the community really controls, who can and can't, earn these proof of liquidity rewards, which funnels back up, and eventually you have a lot of control over who can and can't be a validator. And it's fascinating to me because honestly, that would stop this problem immediately. You would never have to worry about Citadel taking over Berachain.
I mean, I don't know that saying controlling who and who can't be a validator is like, I mean, I understand the point you're making, but as to whether or not this is this open, permissionless, anyone can enter, anyone can exit system, it's opinionated in that direction, right?
Highly opinionated. And again, like I'm not saying that's like, the perfect solution. I'm just saying that it is a way, that is pretty close to being live, that would, nip that problem in the bud. Do I think that, over time, people will come up with an even better one? Yeah. Honestly, Berachain's iterating on this a lot. Like they're doing some pretty cool stuff. But like at the end of the day, this is a problem there are solutions. Some of those solutions have their own problems, but I like to have faith in just the creativity and ingenuity of crypto builders.
What do you think we're trading on blockchains in 5 or 10 years? Like, is decentralized NASDAQ a thing? What is the financial activity that's occurring on blockchains? Because the reason I'm asking you this is because I honestly still don't actually know. Like, I couldn't give you a very firm answer. If I had to, I would say stable coins are like one that I think are very obvious, and I think there are obvious improvements for stable coins versus Venmo or Cash App or whatever. After that, it's hard for me really to think about like what financial activity is occurring on blockchain. So give me your 5-10 year time horizon. I know you don't have to think about this question. I know, because you people who are so deep in the rabbit hole rarely have to actually think about this. You're just solving the little niche problems that occur now.
We're putting out fires as they pop up. We're not forecasting the weather. Yeah. That's a really, really good question. So I don't think, honestly, dude, I don't think that shitcoins are ever going to go away.
No, it's one of the most obvious use cases. Like, I should have said stable coins and meme coins and maybe like NFTs as well. I don't know that the current NFTs are the ones, but I think there is a future for NFTs. I don't know where they live or what they are, but I think there is a future for the concept of digital art. Let's put it that way, on a blockchain.
I think like one of the things I'm actually really curious to see is how stablecoins pan out. Like we had talked earlier about how the velocity of stablecoins is just like, orders of magnitude. I think like at least 20 times higher than like your regular cash. And so when you look at how regulators view crypto, regulators are terrified of stablecoins in particular, because a lot of these stablecoins actually represent this bridge between crypto and like between DeFi and TradFi. And so when you view something that's just like moving at like, an insane speed over in the DeFi realm that is like inexplicably anchored into TradFi, you all of a sudden, have a much higher risk profile because of just how fast it moves over here, just really just pulling on that anchor and potentially taking parts of, TradFi with it. That's why a lot of this, regulation coming down from TradFi has focused on stablecoins. And this is a hot take, but I'm not sure that TradFi is wrong to look at it like that. So honestly, I think that like it'll be really interesting to see what happens with stablecoins. In the next 10 years, I'd be surprised if there wasn't at least some sort of just massive explosion of them, and not like a good explosion. I mean, like a horrible, like a lot of people lose their jobs explosion. It's just, there's a lot of powder in that keg and they're moving very fast and they are, fundamentally tied into the banks. So yeah, no, I think stablecoins, for better or for worse, are going to be a big part of the narrative going forward. I think
stablecoins, so I think you're probably correct. I would also say that if you take sort of a macro view or think that fiat isn't a failing currency, it also makes sense for them to try to continue to export this as, a euro dollar. So I think, we'll have to see. I guess the only reason I said stablecoins though is just because that is something that is very clearly useful, and they are better on blockchains. I don't know how decentralized the blockchains need to be. Like, this is my personal opinion. Like, I don't know what level of decentralization you need for a centrally issued stablecoin, but there is clearly some benefit. But outside of that, in terms of, and you come from a TradFi background as well, so I think that you probably have some intuition as to like what's possible on blockchains or what's not really practical, and I think especially the first generation of DeFi and crypto people, I don't think they had much background in TradFi, right? So they try to come in and destroy traditional finance, and they don't have any idea how it works. So
I think one of the most frustrating things that like I've seen is a lot of people that have no experience whatsoever in TradFi thinking, like, hey, we're going to beat TradFi. We're not going to be centralized like TradFi. And then they just build the most centralized fucking things ever, and it's like the conflict of interest stuff. That's painful to watch. I think that in many ways, a lot of crypto is just like more conflicted and less transparent than TradFi.
For sure.
People don't realize that like every rule and maybe not every rule, but like most rules in TradFi exist because something somewhere blew up at some time, Yeah. And so for crypto people, dude, the most frustrating thing for me is when people are like, we're not going to be like banks. People at banks have to disclose conflicts of interest, but we're not a bank. And it's like that, it's worse. Like it's a good thing that, they're disclosing this stuff. Yeah, I think in general, part of me is terrified of, TradFi coming into crypto. When I look at like the Onyx blockchain from JP Morgan, it's got some nice tech,
Is this what they use? Is this what they use like for interbank transfers?
I don't think so. I think that they're exploring it. I think so Onyx is this like, it's a blockchain. It's got like high functioning privacy. What's there's another blockchain that's actually very similar. I think Aztec. Yeah. In my mental model of Onyx is actually somewhat similar to Aztec, where it's got this like entire privacy layer on top, but it's decentralized and has like a smart contract layer as well. It's pretty cool. But like, I think the banks are very excited about blockchain technology, but banks are also terrified of regulators for good reason. I mean, I've got stories to tell. maybe not for a podcast, but like banks are deservedly terrified of regulators. I think a lot of crypto people, especially that never worked in TradFi, think that, banks and regulators get along because they'll see like, the bank CEO going on the news being like, we think this is a great, regulation that's going to keep the bank, safer. And they don't realize that like, as soon as, the camera cuts off, CEO's like, yes, this is horrible, regulation is going to ruin our profit margins. And it's like, the banks hate regulators. A lot of DeFi thinks it's immune from conflicts of interest. A lot of DeFi thinks that like, because it is DeFi, it is morally pure. And I think that's one just view that we have to really nip in the bud, right? It's like, just because you're building something that's decentralized doesn't make it necessarily a good thing. And I think the quicker crypto comes to terms with that, I think the quicker we can focus on like actually making like good things that are also decentralized. I think decentralization is a strong means to an end, but it's just a means to an end. And I think it's very important to focus on the actual outcome.
Well, very inspiring words to end. Thank you so much for coming on. I had a great time.
Pleasure was all mine, sir. Thanks for having me.